Hello, everyone, and welcome to Breaking Banks Europe, episode 87. And today we bring you an ecosystem zoom in on Estonia. Estonia is one of the leading countries when it comes to fintech startups, all things digital. So a recent report listed that there was at least 215 companies registered in Estonia that could be considered fintechs. We all know Wise, Skype, also companies such as Modular Bank, Monies, and Paxful are all born out of Estonia. And today we bring you three players in the Estonian fintech startup space. So I'd like to welcome my three guests, Aleksei Kolesnikov, the regional manager at Bolt, startup mentor and angel investor. We have Risto Rossar, founder and CEO of Inslee, and Allan Martinson, CEO at Xolo. Welcome, gentlemen. So, Aleksei, can you start off by introducing yourself for those of our listeners who may not know what Bolt is, which I highly doubt? Could you give us a bit more context and, a bit more about kind of your mentorship and angel investing?
Sure, I would love to. Thanks for asking. First of all, Bolt is I would say, let's start differently. Our key priority is we're the ride-hailing platform, meaning we provide urban mobility such as the taxi platform, the scooter rental, and since May, we also have the car sharing unit, which is the quick, almost instant rental of cars in the cities. However, we also have other verticals such as food delivery, and right now we're also building the so-called dark stores vertical, or the marketplace for groceries, etc. And that's pretty much what I'm doing for 95% of my professional time and also a lot of my free time. Otherwise, I'm also a mentor at the local startup accelerator, which is called Technopole. So pretty much what I'm doing here with Technopole is all those tactics and strategies which I learned at Bolt. I try to bring them to the other younger generation of startups so that, at least the next generation could avoid some of the mistakes or build the operations more efficiently. And since last year, I've also started to do angel investing a bit.
Super, thanks, and welcome, Aleksei. Risto, who are you, and can you tell us a bit more about Inslee?
Yes, I'm from Estonia, surprise, surprise, and I've been spending most of my working time building Insurtech companies. The first one I did in the year 2000, that was digital insurance broker company. I sold that, and from 2014 onward, I've been focusing on Inslee. So Inslee is the software for insurance businesses, MGAs, and insurance brokers. And we have customers all over the world. And also, I'm quite active angel investor myself. I have clearly over 20 companies in my portfolio. I work very closely with, I think, most of the Estonian Insurtech companies, but actually it's quite many in Estonia. And that's what I do, build Inslee and help Insurtech, other Insurtech companies as much as I can.
Super, thank you, and welcome, Risto. And lastly, Allan, can you talk to us a bit more about Xolo? When did you found Xolo, and kind of what brought you towards, the path towards Xolo?
Sure, thanks a lot. First of all, about my own background, I've been either founding, managing, or investing in businesses in the last 30 years, mostly in technology and media sector. So, which makes me a bit of like a dinosaur on the market and among the community. But there is also an interesting career twist I had. I spent about 10 years in venture capital and then decided to go back to operational roles and in different companies in very different sectors. But it's Xolo. Xolo is about 6 years old company now. We focus on solopreneurs, which is like one-man businesses and sole traders. And it's a huge industry. It's about twice India's GDP, like trillions of dollars of economic impact, which lacks, let's say, its own oracles and SAPs and platform companies. There's rarely a company which has more than 100,000 customers in that space. And we are one of those. We have about 80,000 people on our platform. And what we do for them is basically putting together SaaS with fintech. So we provide a platform that solopreneurs can use to run the business, starting from registration, either incorporation or registration of a sole trader, to accounting and running the business on our SaaS platform, to actually providing accounting service, which is highly automated, but we already do accounting and tax filings in different countries. And it also has integrated banking functionality, and either we provide the banking functionality or we integrate through open banking, or we integrate with payment gateways and so on. So it's basically a one-stop shop for a solopreneur to launch and run the business. And our goal is to save about 10 times the time we spent on business administration, and we have pretty much succeeded doing that.
Cool, super. As a solopreneur, I can totally appreciate a one-stop shop for everything. So I wanted to get started with kind of uncovering what makes Estonia so special. So I guess let's stick with you, Allan. In your opinion, what has been the secret sauce towards making Estonia one of the markets in Europe that has the most startups per capita?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, some basic facts. Estonia has 1.3 million inhabitants, which makes it one of the smallest countries in Europe. But it is really much bigger when it comes to startups. Based on different calculations, Estonia is in top 3 in the world of startups per capita, basically together with the United States and Israel. So it is somewhat similar to Israel, I would say, a small country with very, very strong technology sector. And there are different reasons for that. And first of all, Estonia is very, very small. And this means that it's almost impossible to become rich or build a big business in Estonia alone. You need to become an international from day one and build an international business. So secondly, Estonia is very, very close to the Nordic countries, and it is essentially part of the Nordic tech economy, if you wish. And those links and connections have been developed early on and have contributed a lot to Estonian success. And then basically about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we started to get very strong startups, and maybe the most notable one is Skype, obviously, like that's in everybody's minds when it comes to Estonia. And very many people who are now active in startup scene, they have been part of those startups. And many people from Skype alumni have started new businesses. Maybe the most notable in fintech space being TransferWise, or now Wise, which is going to be listed in a few days' time since this recording, but also many others. And this is kind of going in waves, and so like in very typical fashion. So the company becomes big as they get exited, and people go away and launch new businesses. And I believe we are now like into third or fourth wave of startups, and it's kind of non-stoppable. And I see that Estonia is doing very many things right. And so it has a very simple government system, very simple tax system, sort of lots of people, lots of expats living in Estonia and participating in those startups. Around every third or fourth people in Estonian startups are not Estonians, so, which is again not very, very common in other countries in Europe. And that has brought together lots of different ideas and cultures and approaches, and contributed to the overall success.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good overview by Allan. In general level, I was, when Allan was kind of talking, I was thinking what makes like Estonian startups. I also talk with other country startups, and Estonia has somehow, I always have a feeling that Estonian startups need to make one extra step than all other country startups. Because if you come from the small country, you have kind of, okay, we all think from the day one globally. So there's like no point, what Allan mentioned, no point to build product for the Estonian. There's even no point to make it for the Baltic states. So you need to do it globally, but still you build that global product, you always start from Estonia. Like even let's say Bolt, you launch products in Estonia, and like when you go to the investors, and whatever you have achieved in Estonia, that actually like doesn't count, because that's like it's a garden of like so small country. Prove before you get the money, prove that you can actually do business in some normal country as well. So and that I don't know whether that extra step is good or bad, but like everyone kind of does it, and maybe that makes us a little bit more. And it's also kind of and then the fundraising is actually more difficult because almost all Estonian startups, I think they raise money with very strong fundamentals. When I'm comparing Estonian startups to, let's say, normal-sized country startups, then I think we are, like always, the valuations are 2 times lower compared to the actual results, because we kind of deliver. We need to prove before we get money. And when you are, let's say, in Germany, then when a story is strong, you have some traction in Germany, then you already raise a lot of money. I don't know whether it's good or bad, but that's kind of maybe my observation when I'm seeing the struggle of Estonian startups compared to the similar ones in the other country. So yeah, that's maybe wanted to add. So.
Yeah, interesting.
Maybe just to add to Risto, one interesting fact: Estonian startups don't die for some reason. It's like very strange. Like usually in Silicon Valley, you can count like half of the startups are gone after 5 or 7 years. I can only probably list in like 5 fingers the number of startups and have died in Estonia in the last 5-7 years. So for some reason, they just continue pulling forward and like even if there are tough times, they somehow get through them. It's very, very different mentality in that aspect from, let's say, American die quickly mentality.
That was a very extensive overview. Just to add a couple points, I really agree with Risto here regarding the fundamentals. I would even make a bold statement. I would say that whenever you compare an Estonian startup with any other startup from States or Western Europe operating in the same industry, most likely the Estonian startup will have lower OPEX, operating expenses. We're extremely frugal. We're extremely lean, and I think it also comes from the fact that we're a small country. We don't have too many resources, so we have learned, like the hard way to keep everything like really, really carefully, from human resources to, well, finances, whatever you call it.
Thanks for adding that point. I think, yeah, that definitely makes sense, and I've been hearing that from other, smaller countries with a strong startup scene. And I wanted to touch upon something. I mean, would you say that a lot of the investment then is coming from former Estonian startup founders? Like, do the angel investors, I mean, Risto, you mentioned that you're investing, primarily in Estonian companies. Is it kind of like the cycle of, successful startups in Estonia and giving back? Is that the main source of funding in the market?
I think that's quite standard everywhere. So you early stage money is always taken from, let's say, close to your network. So, and yes, of course, I think almost all startup founders who exit, or not even like when they can do some kind of partial exit, then right away they start investing into other companies. And I think these are these waves what Allan mentioned. So I think like we have probably all of these things covered. We have now quite strong angel network. We have already quite many seed stage funds in Estonia, and up until, let's say, B series. Again, in principle, to the A series, you can do like Estonia, but I think probably from 1 million onward, you have already, let's say, foreign funds coming in. But before that, it's mostly done locally. And I think Estonia now has quite a lot of money already, and that's these are the reasons of these exits, because the non-startup money it doesn't usually find the ways. It doesn't usually come to the start. It's a different mindset investing into startups, and I think it's very rarely these people are doing that for earning a lot of money. It's more like I tend to call it like expensive hobby. So I think that's what it most likely is. So and when we get money back, then that's mostly, of course, we will get. But it's you don't do it with the reason that I need to make 25% return yearly. Otherwise, I think that there are other arguments behind that. And I think that's really important for a startup environment, that you have the local angel money.
Last year, Estonian startups raised close to 500 million euros in capital, which is amazing for a country of 1.3 million people. And on per capita basis, it's about 10 times more than European average. So it's even bigger on per capita basis than, I don't know, Sweden or UK. And Estonian startups have raised more money than like Finland, Finnish startup ecosystem together in absolute terms. And Finland is 5 times bigger country. So it is amazing, and it tells a lot about the quality of startups. Around 92% of the capital came from foreign investors. Yes, in early stage, like in seed, pre-seed, there were angel investors involved. Obviously, local capital plays very important role and a very often decisive role. But when we speak about hundreds of millions, so that money must be coming from international sources. But maybe one very important thing is not only about capital, it's also all sort of contacts and advice and network and so on. So that's very, very strong, again, locally. Local founders at the ecosystem is very strong, and angels are contributing a lot. And that has helped many of the local startups to gain speed very rapidly.
Yeah, I think also like that network is another kind of element. What I thought is that I think it's kind of you believe that you can do the successful startup when you see that the guy with whom you work together in Skype or Bolt, he did it. So like, he's not like really much better than I am. I think it kind of gives that self-confidence that is needed, that Estonians have like actually I think probably quite low self-confidence level compared to, let's say, US or this kind of, but I think that boost has been given to the Estonian startup entrepreneurs. We can do it. If kind of these guys did it, I do it as well. And that seems like as important probably than funding.
And yeah, as my colleagues have said, the best part is the more mature startups give birth to a new generation of startups. I think we have all, well, my colleagues here, we have seen last year that the Pipedrive employees have formed, well, quite a few syndicates and invested into new startups. And from my own experience, last summer I had an interesting case. My colleague, who was the head of operations department in Estonia, he left, well, my department to start his own startup. And about half of my team invested in his idea. So while he was working at Bolt, he learned all the ropes, how to manage operations. He came up with his own idea, and then he got investment from his colleagues. And I'm pretty sure this was happening in other startups, in Estonia as well. And this is quite interesting, I would say.
Yeah, that's that's quite an interesting way to keep, fueling the startup mindset and keeping it local. My last
maybe
question.
one more interesting thing before we ask another question. Like I think Estonia is the only country. I think it's the only country where I think almost all of the startup founders are in one Slack channel. We have that Founders Society, like 130 members there, and you can see, let's say, the founders of Wise there, and you can see some new guys who just yesterday made the startups. And it's one community. We talk, we do events, we chat in Slack on a daily basis. And I think I don't whether someone has heard that it exists in another country, but I doubt. So that's quite powerful.
Yeah, Risto, I think you read my mind because that was going to be my next question. What's the
mind reading is also
that's another skill of the Estonians. Yeah, I mean, that was my question around, how you mentioned there's a strong kind of network and advisory. So I mean, I think that's probably the only market where all the startups are part of one Slack channel. I mean, apart from that Slack channel, what else is happening in terms of, is it like everything's kind of concentrated in Tallinn? Is there it seems that there's a close-knit community. From my experience in London, it was a very, very, very close-knit fintech community, which, has helped London become such a strong scene. Whereas, in Germany, things are a bit more kind of segmented throughout, Germany. So it's definitely not as cohesive as a startup in fintech scene. So what else is there besides a founder Slack that I'm sure a lot of people would pay good money to get into from the Estonian founders?
That's actually a pretty cool idea to monetize that Slack channel and just allow people to monitor it for free.
Redirect for a few thousand euros per month.
Yeah. But you asked about Tallinn. So Estonia has two main cities, Tallinn and Tartu, which is just a smaller university town of like 100,000 people. And some people have compared Estonia to the capital area and then the national park, and which is maybe is partly true. So it is very much concentrated in Tallinn and to a certain extent in Tartu. And Tallinn obviously is very close to Helsinki. It's about 2 hours on boat or maybe 20 minutes on plane. So it has some connections also to the Finnish ecosystem in that aspect. So, but overall, I would say if you take Estonia, the Estonian startup ecosystem is also very well represented in other cities like London, for example, to a lesser extent Berlin. It used to be present in the US and in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley. So not too much anymore because almost everybody has moved back to Europe, and there is a great exodus from Silicon Valley, not only of Estonians but everybody else. So, but London seems to be like the second biggest Estonian startup town, I would say, if you need to count the people residing there.
Aleksei, anything you want to add in terms of your experience from anything happening kind of specifically in Tallinn or any?
Not in Tallinn per se. One thing perhaps to add, at Technopol, we have recently tried to specifically target the Estonian northeast, which is a predominantly Russian-speaking area. We have the third biggest city in there, which is, I would say like 90% Russian-speaking. So we had a hypothesis to test if there are also, people and ideas which need a bit of more push just due to language barriers or whatever. It's still too early to make a conclusion yet. We've been only doing it for about half a year. But my point being that, we don't only focus on Tallinn, we're just thinking about going into other areas as well to see if there is any untapped potential still left missing.
Okay, interesting. Great. So we're going to jump to the break now. So we've set the scene for, understanding what makes Estonia so special when it comes to such a high success rate when it comes to startups. I'd love to get my hands on that statistic around how many startups have actually died in Estonia and how that compares. So we'll jump to a quick break and then bring you back to part 2, where we'll dive a bit more into, the kind of trends in the fintech space in Estonia and where some of the key startups in the fintech space, what verticals they're actually sitting in. Welcome back to part 2 of Breaking Banks Europe, episode 87, Ecosystem Zoom In on Estonia. So kicking off the second part, I want to start with, what sectors and verticals the Estonian fintechs are sitting under. So I was reading that the market's pretty much dominated by digital asset exchange, fintechs, or digital lending. Is this correct, or is there, a broad spectrum of what areas the fintechs are playing in currently?
Yeah, who wants to take it? So I think I maybe can, like in general level, it seems to be that Estonians tend to do more B2B than B2C, right? Because the market is small, so with the B2B, I mean, that's also kind of less risk, and we kind of, I think in a banking and in insurance, we have many B2B companies. So I think that's like in general one thing. I don't know how many lending, there are kind of lending marketplaces as well. So I don't know whether you want to dig into specific companies, what we should discuss, or keep it on a more general level.
Maybe as an overall landscape, I was just taking a look at sort of map of Estonian fintech companies prior to this recording, and I must admit I didn't know half of the companies. So it's even if I'm very well connected in the startup scene. So Estonia seems to have startups in every segment of fintech, and of course there are some really big companies, like if you take Wise, which is not the largest Estonian, founded fintech not in only Estonia but one of the biggest in Europe. And there are several smaller ones like Moniz operating out from London, but essentially being an Estonian fintech and so on. So maybe one interesting thing is that there is a full separate universe of crypto companies, and it usually is a bit separate from the rest of startup communities. They don't interact too much, but there are hundreds of companies involved in crypto in different aspects. Estonia also was one of the flag of convenience countries for crypto companies to get registered and licensed, especially a few years ago. And there is about maybe 2,000 usually foreign-owned companies registered in Estonia for crypto markets. And to be honest, not too many people have idea what those people do. And as I said, it was a big wave of registrations. Now it's gone down. But I have heard that the crypto guys also have some remarkably interesting companies doing very, really interesting stuff. So, but in like mainstream, as I mentioned, so we do have digital banks and like payment institutions like Wise and Moniz and a few others, and we have payment firms, and some of them have been exited. We have very strong banking technology firms like Modular Bank and Pocosys, which got sold to Opera a few years ago. So and obviously Insurtech represented by Risto here. So yes, it's like very wide landscape, and lots of those companies are still early stage. So, but I believe we will see a few more unicorns emerging from that society.
Cool. Thanks for the overview, Alan. That's very interesting about the I guess what's happening in the crypto space, and the easy licensing and over 2,000 companies, but also interesting that the crypto community kind of I guess they kind of stay away a bit from the fintech community. Interesting. So I mean, I guess with some of the fintechs, like Wise, Money, some of the other in the payments, you mentioned that, Estonian startups start out thinking globally rather than locally. But are they using like Estonia as the test ground, whether they're in B2B or B2C, or is kind of the MVP always focused on, how can we offer a solution that's globally applicable that we can, scale and expand to quite quickly? Because, Alan, I saw that Xolo is now, I think, offering solutions in Spain. So how does that work in terms of product development?
Sure. Yeah, so now regarding if companies start from Estonia, some do, some don't. And, as a former venture capitalist, I can very much just relate to what Risto said earlier. Getting Estonian references and Estonian experience is not actually a good sign. Sometimes even opposite, because you may get very wrong understanding how the world and how your business works. It's very easy to pick up. Everybody's one phone call away in Estonia, but then it doesn't work this way in the rest of the world. So, but I believe many of the companies take the benefit of what Estonia has to offer as an ecosystem, and we already spoke about angels and founders and so on. But also the country itself. And when it comes to Xolo, for example, our roots where we started 6 years ago was in a program called Estonia's e-residency. So Estonia was one of the first countries, and still one of the few countries which is offering government-issued digital identity that opens the door to the government's digital infrastructure, so that people could do everything, like from founding companies to paying taxes very easily and completely online. And we started from that. So our business is global. We're offering Estonia as a country of incorporation for the founders from all over the world. We have customers from more countries than United Nations have members, including one from North Korea, or carrying North Korean passport. But again, it doesn't mean that we are doing Estonian business. We're using Estonia as a platform. And after gaining experience with this kind of an expat and location independent crowd, we have moved now to launch the same platform or same business in different national markets, starting from Spain, but extending it to other European countries soon.
Oh, I could actually mention one point regarding the testing ground in Estonia. So as you know, Bolt still has the HQ here in Tallinn, and whenever we launch a new product vertical, yeah, we didn't have any exceptions. We always start with our hometown. And if you think it's the easy way, I have to argue here. For some of the business verticals, it was really arguable or debatable. Last example, in May, we launched the car sharing. Right now, it only operates in Estonia. And we started in Tallinn. And my friends, one of my friends who works as a transportation engineer and who had experience in car sharing, he was debating that in Tallinn, the unit economics wouldn't make sense because the city is not big enough, and car sharing is pretty much an ideal thing for a megapolis, a huge city. And I'm quite proud to say that after almost 2 months of operations, so far we're seeing good results, and most likely we'll scale it. But back to your question, yes, we still start in Estonia with whatever new product we have normally.
Thank you. Risto, anything to add from the Insurtech space?
There's like amazing number of Insurtech companies in Estonia. I think when I started my, let's say, maybe if someone would have asked me like 4 or 5 years ago, how many Insurtechs do you think will come out of Estonia? I think I would have said 1, 2, 3. I thought like 10 of them. It's like, it's a lot. And it's really, I thought that maybe I'm also the exception, but it seems to be the case that most of the Insurtechs are done by non-insurance people, and doing like the global Insurtech company outside from Estonia, like that didn't make no sense for me in the beginning. So okay, I could imagine I had some technology, some history, but then some guys come and do the Insurtech out of nowhere, and that's really cool. And there is, let's say, Cachet guys, Insmoo, there's now like Rendin, but there's so many of them. So it's like every year they create 1 or 2 or 3 more. Or maybe on a like London level, it's nothing. But putting that into perspective, it's actually quite mind-blowing, at least for me. So that's good.
Cool, awesome.
Yeah, maybe if I would offer one observation here. So I would say absolute majority of Estonian startups, and they start from pretty naive approach to the business they are tackling, and many of those are not coming from the industries they are trying to disrupt. And I would say that most people, they just look on how complex it is in some other countries and ask, like coming from a very simple country and very simple environment of Estonia, where everything is simple by default. So we ask questions, why should it be so complex? And in many cases, it should not be so complex. And that's how, I don't know, TransferWise got started years ago, and why like moving currencies must be so expensive, or like how Bolt was founded, like why shall the taxi industry be so complex and not user friendly? So same with us in Xolo. So we look at how solopreneurs or sole traders or like one-man companies are treated in terms of taxation and bureaucracy in different countries. We ask, why on earth shall it be so complex? And can we simplify it? Can we make it like 10 times more simpler? And if we can't maybe change the governance approaches in other countries, we can at least build an interface so that we actually hide that complexity and make it simple for the customers. And that's overall striving to simplicity and like reducing complexity and like optimizing and simplifying different business processes, also in finance, seems to be a trademark of Estonian startup economy.
Yeah, I may also maybe add one interesting observation from my side. I'm usually meeting these Insurtech entrepreneurs when they, let's say, have the idea, and then I'm like, that doesn't make usually no sense for me what they want to do. Because I also feel like I've been in industry for 20 years, and then like and actually the end result and fast forward 3 years, now they are doing completely different things that they actually pitched in the beginning, and what they actually started with didn't make no sense. But that doesn't matter. So there is kind of that I don't die. I do 3 pivots. And when and then they come up with something like really reasonable at the end of the day. So comparing, and then you talk with some insurance professional, like if that person that gives you that story in the beginning can actually execute that, then you can everything is possible. So and you have that kind of determinedness to make something happen, and they get hit against the wall, they do it again and again. And I think that's kind of, at least in Insurtech space, I've seen that like many times. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think it's going back to, that idea of kind of, the resiliency of within this Estonian mindset. I want to touch upon kind of the, what role the government, the regulator plays in supporting and helping to create such a vibrant and successful fintech community. So, I mean, Allan, you mentioned, about the e-residency scheme. Would you say this has helped to perhaps, raise awareness of Estonia? Has this, has one of the results been, a highly digital place to do business? What role does the government have in kind of the success of Estonia?
Sure. Yeah, it's been probably in making for the last 30 years when Estonia got independent, because back in 91, 92, when the foundation of the country was set up, many of the pillars are still there, like a very simple tax system, for example, and relatively low taxes, very easy overall regulatory environment, or let's say administration environment, e-government, and so on. So, and that's, maybe I could sum it up, the government is not actually messing with business, and it lets the business to grow. And the government was behind also creating the venture capital industry in the country by launching the government-owned fund, and again, based on like Finland's and Israel's experience about 15 years ago. And it kickstarted the overall venture capital industry, and then it was closed down because it was not longer needed. So again, very important in the early emergence of the startup community. So you asked about the regulator. So regulator is a financial supervisory authority, and it is obviously a separate branch of the government, and they have different other mandates. So they need to, of course, monitor compliance, and it is obviously a controversial issue, because on one hand you need to make sure that everything works and there is no like money laundering and stuff. So at the same time, you need to get the full ecosystem evolving. And I sense that the Estonian regulator is kind of caught between a rock and a hard place oftentimes. About 4 or 5 years ago, we had a pretty big scandal regarding money laundering, which was related to foreign-owned Estonian banks like Danske Bank from Denmark, most of all. And that made the regulator very cautious, and the overall banking system very cautious. So let's say the overall Estonian banking system, which is majority owned by Scandinavian banks, so is again a bit of like universe on its own. And there are only a few local banks who are more inclined to work with the startup community. So it's difficult for me to comment if the regulator is like how they are treating fintech startups. Maybe Risto, I think you need to deal with them. So how do you feel it?
Bad. So regardless of our regulator, our fintech industry is good. I think Estonian regulator, they're not kind of, I think they're really, they don't take any risks.
Yeah.
You can assume that, yes, that's the job of the regulator, not to take risks, but like comparing, when you know what the UK regulator is, then I think they are much more supportive. They are much more open for the startup. Estonian regulator is very conservative. I think one of the most conservative that I've seen in the world, and also many Estonian Insurtechs actually licensed them outside of Estonia, because just they try. Sometimes they try. They are not like the bad people. You can see kind of they actually want, but there is something that is holding them. Maybe because they are all lawyers. It's everyone in the management board seems to be the lawyers. Maybe that's the problem. I don't know, but I think that's kind of the mindset. They only see the risks. But like regardless of that, it's possible to do. It's possible to talk with them, possible to agree with the things with them. But I certainly would like to see much more openness, much more support from regulators that they actually are providing. Yeah, I think Estonian government is another interesting animal. I think like Estonian businesses are not really good at selling themselves. The Estonian government is. I think one thing is like oversold. That's Estonian government, and in a good way. I think like the ease of doing the business. It's like actually it's not so much better than everywhere else, but the image that we have created is super good. And I think that's kind of Estonian business should learn from Estonian government how to oversell itself. So I think that's kind of my take on that government and supervisory authorities. I'm not really big fan of governments at all. But Estonia, I think it's kind of they're okay. They are. If everywhere else it's like any Estonians like are reasonable. The government is, let's say, it's okay. So but regulators should be really more innovative. I think that we benefit a lot out of that.
Yeah. Okay. Aleksei, question for you. So I guess, Bolt, would you consider Bolt a super app? And if yes, how would you approach kind of playing in the fintech or payments or financial services space?
That's a good question. Thank you. Well, we definitely are aiming to become a super app. However, would I say that we are already a super app right now? Perhaps not yet. Because in my opinion, we might debate regarding about the concept, but probably by super app you mean a solution or product which can solve all your daily needs. Right now we are still mostly focusing on logistics, urban mobility, and delivery. So we still need to add at least some financial services or something like that, and we'll probably be moving in this direction. But for now, it's still the focus is urban mobility and delivery.
Yep. Gotcha. Okay, thank you. So I'd like to wrap up the podcast with one question from my guests. What advice would you give to fintechs outside of Estonia? So it's quite clear that, there's a highly successful, highly collaborative fintech space in Estonia, lots of success stories. So, what can other fintechs, I guess, learn from what Estonia is doing right? So Aleksei, let's start off with you.
I'll probably start with the thing which surprised me, because I came to startups and to Bolt specifically from a financial sector. I used to work at a relatively big brokerage. And the first thing which really surprised or even amazed me, I would say even blew my mind completely, is how people help each other in the ecosystem. In Estonian startup ecosystem, it's completely fine for you to approach a guy whom you don't know in another startup, ask for advice, and most likely he or she will reply to you, yeah, you can solve this in an ABC way. And my point being, try to be more helpful. You don't have to compete with everybody. I mean, the world's a huge place. There's enough business for everyone. And if we all help each other, well, Estonian example shows that we can achieve a lot of stuff with small resources.
Okay, thank you. Risto?
Yeah, I think as I have worked in London and in other different countries, now I have spent my last 18 months working only from Estonia. Actually, Estonia is a really good place to work. So if you don't need to have the license from the regulator, then Estonia is a perfect place to do your fintech company. I think it's close to London. It's a very relaxed place to work. The stress level in Estonia is probably 5 times more than anywhere else. So nature is good, people are good, and it's good to work here. And let's say that's kind of one of the, at least it should be the top 3 places to do your company. So yeah, I think that's
Sure.
If I may, a quick comment to add. When it comes to the challenges of our ecosystem, it's hard to find enough talent. So we're actively bringing people from outside of Estonia. And most likely, when you bring people from, let's say, Western Europe, everybody says that Estonian sport is surprising. It's hard to attract people here in the first place, but when they arrive, they actually understand that living here is really nice. You have a very comfortable lifestyle compared to, again, Western Europe. You don't spend time on logistics, the air is clean, and nature is perfect, and yeah.
Yeah.
Bit of
Nice.
advertising here.
Even though the winters can be quite dark, it's worth it.
No snow, white snow will make it light again. So no problem.
Alan, what would your advice be?
Yes, and my advice, I'm not maybe like my friends advertised Estonia a lot already, but basically my key advice was maybe to take some of the Estonian approach when it comes to building a fintech. So take a big market, take a big problem, and then try to simplify it as much as possible, and not to try to build another, I don't know, IBM or Oracle at once, but build something really simple that helps lots of people to simplify something or make something easier. And then you can, of course, scale from that and add new businesses and functions. Like Bolt has been adding new business lines now, like every 3 or 6 months. But you need to start from something very simple and really execute on that.
And
Great.
please focus on fixing the problem, not finding the solution. Because being a mentor, the most annoying thing which I see is when a new team comes and they show a solution and there is no clear problem which the solution is fixing. You know, it's a classical mistake and it's a bit of annoying. So please focus on the problem.
Okay, thank you so much, gentlemen. It was really nice to hear about what makes Estonia so successful. I think our listeners will definitely kind of, take away, for how to implement, let's call it the Estonian mindset. So, focusing on the problems, high amount of resilience, collaboration, thinking, I guess, maybe perhaps with a international expansion mindset first when launching your product. And yeah, I mean, I'm definitely sold on Estonia. It sounds like an awesome place. And despite the darkness, I think I'm convinced it'd be a great place to, find that nice work-life balance, have the nature. And I think it'd be worth it to get into that Estonia founders Slack group that you mentioned. So great. Let's leave it with, if you could share where our listeners can find out more about yourselves and your company, that'd be super. Aleksei, where can people find out more about you and more about Bolt?
Well, I think regarding Bolt, all the information is on the website, bolt.eu. As for myself, I think LinkedIn would be the default way to contact me.
Super, thank you. And Risto?
Yeah, I think the same here. Visit my LinkedIn profile, message me there, or inslee.com is the Inslee web. In case, in unlikely event, you need insurance software. So.
Thank you. And Alan?
Yes, and our company's website is Xolo, Xolo.io, and any freelancer, solopreneur, sole trader shall go and sign up immediately, and including you, Meaghan. And I can be contacted on LinkedIn. So that's the easiest way for me as well. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for our listeners. This was Breaking Banks Europe, episode 87, Ecosystem Zoom In on Estonia. Thank you again to my guests.